Hello, and welcome to the Investing Iguana, the show where I help you make smart financial decisions for your future. I'm Iggy, your host and guide on this exciting journey. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that many of you have probably dreamed about at some point: quitting your job to travel the world. Sounds amazing, right? But is it really worth it? What are the pros and cons of leaving everything behind and hitting the road for a year or more? And how can you do it without breaking the bank or ruining your career prospects? These are some of the questions we'll explore in this video, based on the website Practical Wanderlust, which is run by Lia and Jeremy, a couple who did exactly that. They quit their jobs, got married, and embarked on a year-long honeymoon around the world. They share their honest and hilarious experiences, tips, and lessons learned on their blog, and I highly recommend checking it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. But before we dive into their story, let me ask you this: have you ever thought about quitting your job to travel? If so, what's stopping you? And if not, why not? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this one. Alright, let's get started. The first thing you need to know about quitting your job to travel is that it's not as easy as it sounds. There are a lot of things you need to consider and prepare for before you take the plunge. And there are also a lot of things that nobody tells you about what it's really like to live out of a backpack for a year or more. Lia and Jeremy have compiled a list of 13 things that they wish they had known before they quit their jobs to travel, and I'm going to share them with you today. Here they are. Thing number 1. You won't tell anyone that you plan to quit your job and go travel on the off chance that saying it out loud will somehow jinx it. This is something that I can relate to. When I decided to quit my job as an accountant and start this YouTube channel, I didn't tell anyone except my wife until it was too late to back out. I was afraid that people would think I was crazy or irresponsible or try to talk me out of it. I wanted to keep it as a secret until I was ready to announce it to the world. And that's exactly what Lia and Jeremy did too. They kept their plans under wraps until they had booked their tickets, hotels, and tours, and then they broke the news to their friends, family, and coworkers. They say that this made them feel more committed and excited about their decision, and also avoided any unnecessary drama or negativity. Thing number 2, you'll spend months planning every detail of your trip, and then throw most of it out the window. This is another thing that I can relate to. When I started this channel, I had a detailed plan of what topics I wanted to cover, what format I wanted to use, what equipment I needed, etc. But as soon as I started filming and editing my videos, I realized that a lot of my plans were unrealistic or impractical or just plain boring. So I had to improvise and adapt and try new things along the way. And that's exactly what Lia and Jeremy did too. They spent months researching every destination they wanted to visit, every activity they wanted to do, every budget they needed to stick to, and then they realized that most of their plans were either too ambitious or too restrictive or too expensive or too boring. So they ended up changing their itinerary several times, skipping some places altogether, staying longer in others, adding new ones on a whim. They say that this made their trip more spontaneous and fun, but also more stressful and chaotic at times. Thing number 3, you'll pack way too much stuff and then regret it. This is something that I can't relate to because I'm a minimalist by nature. When I travel, I only bring a carry-on bag with the essentials: clothes, toiletries, laptop, camera. That's it. But Lia and Jeremy are not minimalists. They packed 2 huge backpacks each with everything they thought they might need: clothes for every season and occasion, gadgets for every purpose, books for every mood. And then they regretted it. They say that lugging around so much stuff was exhausting and inconvenient. They had to pay extra fees for checked baggage. They had trouble finding storage space in hostels. They had difficulty accessing their belongings when they needed them. They had no room for souvenirs. And worst of all, they didn't even use half of the stuff they brought. So they ended up donating or throwing away a lot of their stuff along the way, and buying new stuff when they needed it. They say that this made them realize how little they actually needed to be happy and comfortable, and how much they valued experiences over things. Thing number 4, you'll get sick, a lot. This is something that I can't relate to, because I have a strong immune system. When I travel, I rarely get sick. Maybe a cold or a stomach ache once in a while, but nothing serious. But Lia and Jeremy are not so lucky. They got sick, a lot. They say that they caught every bug and virus imaginable. From food poisoning to dengue fever to altitude sickness to parasites. They spent a lot of time in hospitals, pharmacies, and bathrooms. They had to cancel or postpone some of their plans. They had to deal with pain, discomfort, and anxiety. And they had to spend a lot of money on medical bills and medication. They say that this made them appreciate their health more than ever, and also their travel insurance company, which covered most of their expenses and helped them navigate the healthcare systems of different countries. Thing number 5, you'll make friends, and then say goodbye. This is something that I can relate to, because I'm a social person. When I travel, I love meeting new people from different backgrounds and cultures. I love sharing stories and experiences with them. I love learning from them and teaching them. And I love having fun with them. But Lia and Jeremy are not so social. They are introverts by nature. They say that they didn't expect to make many friends on their trip. They thought they would stick to themselves and enjoy each other's company. But they were wrong. They say that they met some of the most amazing people on their trip. People who became their travel buddies, their mentors, their confidants, their family. And then they had to say goodbye. They say that this was one of the hardest parts of their trip. Leaving behind people who had touched their lives in profound ways. People who they might never see again. They say that this made them cherish every moment they spent with them and also keep in touch with them through social media and email. Thing number 6, you'll miss home, but not as much as you think. This is something that I can relate to because I'm a homebody at heart. When I travel, I miss my home. My family, my friends, my pets, my routine, my comfort zone. But Lia and Jeremy are not so homey. They are adventurers by spirit. They say that they didn't miss home much on their trip. They were too busy exploring new places, trying new things, living new experiences. They say that they only felt homesick occasionally. When they missed a special occasion, when they heard bad news, when they craved a familiar food, when they needed a hug. They say that this made them realize how much they loved their home, but also how much they loved their freedom. Thing number 7, you'll learn a lot about yourself. This is something that I can relate to because I'm a lifelong learner. When I travel, I learn a lot. About the world, about other people, about other cultures, about other perspectives. But Lia and Jeremy learned even more. About themselves. They say that quitting their jobs to travel was the best decision they ever made for their personal growth. They say that they learned more about themselves in 1 year than in their entire lives before that. They learned about their strengths and weaknesses, their likes and dislikes, their values and beliefs, their dreams and fears. They learned how to cope with challenges and uncertainties, how to adapt to changes and surprises, how to communicate and compromise, how to be grateful and generous, how to be happy and fulfilled. They say that this made them more confident and self-aware, more open-minded and curious, more compassionate and empathetic. Thing number 8, you'll change your perspective on everything. This is something that I can relate to because I'm a critical thinker. When I travel, I change my perspective. On everything. I question my assumptions and biases, I challenge my opinions and judgments, I reconsider my choices and actions. But Lia and Jeremy changed their perspective even more. On everything. They say that quitting their jobs to travel was the most eye-opening experience of their lives. They say that they saw things that they never imagined existed, things that shocked them or amazed them or inspired them or moved them. They say that they encountered people who lived very differently from them, people who had very different views from them or very similar ones, people who taught them or learned from them or disagreed with them or agreed with them. They say that they experienced things that they never thought possible, things that scared them or thrilled them or challenged them or changed them. They say that this made them more aware and appreciative of the diversity and complexity of the world, more respectful and tolerant of the differences and similarities among people. Thing number 9, you'll have fun, but not all the time. This is something that I can relate to because I'm a realistic person. When I travel, I have fun, but not all the time. I know that travel is not always glamorous or exciting or easy. There are also boring or frustrating or difficult moments. But Lia and Jeremy had even more fun, and more not fun, than I did. They say that quitting their jobs to travel was the most fun and the most not fun thing they ever did. They say that they had some of the best moments of their lives on their trip. Moments that made them laugh or smile or cry tears of joy. Moments that filled them with awe or wonder or gratitude. Moments that they will never forget. But they also had some of the worst moments of their lives on their trip. Moments that made them angry or sad or cry tears of pain. Moments that filled them with fear or doubt or regret. Moments that they wish they could erase. They say that this made them more resilient and flexible, more optimistic and realistic, more adventurous and cautious. Thing number 10, you'll spend a lot of money, but it will be worth it. This is something that I can relate to, because I'm a frugal person. When I travel, I spend a lot of money, but I try to make it worth it. I budget carefully, I look for deals, I prioritize quality over quantity. But Lia and Jeremy spent even more money, and they made it even more worth it than I did. They say that quitting their jobs to travel was the most expensive and the most worthwhile thing they ever did. They say that they spent a lot of money on their trip. Money that they had saved for years, money that they could have used for other things, money that they sometimes regretted spending. They say that they spent money on flights, hotels, tours, food, souvenirs, insurance, emergencies, etc. They say that they spent money on things that they loved, things that they hated, things that they needed, things that they didn't need. But they also say that they spent money on priceless experiences, experiences that enriched their lives, experiences that taught them lessons, experiences that gave them memories. They say that this made them more savvy and responsible with their money, but also more generous and spontaneous with it. Thing number 11, you'll face some challenges in your relationship. This is something that I can relate to, because I'm a married person. When I travel with my wife, we face some challenges in our relationship. We argue sometimes, we disagree sometimes, we annoy each other sometimes. But Lia and Jeremy faced even more challenges in their relationship than we did. They say that quitting their jobs to travel was the most challenging and the most rewarding thing they ever did for their relationship. They say that they faced some challenges in their relationship on their trip. Challenges that tested their patience, their trust, their communication, their compatibility. They say that they faced challenges such as spending 24/7 together, making decisions together, dealing with stress together, resolving conflicts together. They say that they faced challenges such as missing their friends and family, adjusting to different cultures and lifestyles, coping with different moods and needs, supporting each other's goals and dreams. But they also say that they faced these challenges together. Together as a team, together as partners, together as friends, together as lovers. They say that this made them stronger and closer as a couple, more understanding and supportive of each other. Thing number 12, you'll come back home, but you won't be the same. This is something that I can relate to, because I'm a changed person. When I came back home from my travels, I wasn't the same. I was different in many ways. But Lia and Jeremy came back home even more different than I did. They say that quitting their jobs to travel was the most transformative and the most difficult thing they ever did for themselves. They say that they came back home different in many ways. Ways that changed their outlook, their attitude, their behavior, their identity. They say that they came back home with new skills and knowledge, new interests and hobbies, new values and beliefs, new goals and plans. They say that they came back home with new friends and connections, new stories and memories, new insights and perspectives, new hopes and dreams. But they also say that they came back home to a different world. A world that had changed while they were gone, a world that didn't understand them anymore, a world that didn't fit them anymore. They say that this made them feel lost and confused at first, but also motivated and inspired to find their place and purpose. Thing number 13, you'll want to do it again, but you won't. This is something that I can't relate to, because I do it again and again. When I travel, I always want to do it again, and I do. I love traveling so much that I made it my career and my passion. But Lia and Jeremy don't want to do it again, and they won't. They say that quitting their jobs to travel was the best and the worst thing they ever did for themselves. They say that they loved their trip so much that they wanted to do it again, and they did. They went on another year-long trip a few years later, this time as travel bloggers. They say that they enjoyed their second trip as much as their first one, but also faced similar challenges and problems. They say that they learned new things and had new experiences, but also repeated some mistakes and regrets. But they also say that they don't want to do it again, and they won't. They say that they realize that traveling full-time is not for them, that they prefer a more balanced and stable lifestyle, that they have other priorities and responsibilities now. They say that this made them more satisfied and content with what they have, but also more curious and adventurous with what they can do. So there you have it, folks. 13 things that nobody tells you about quitting your job to travel, according to Lia and Jeremy from Practical Wanderlust. I hope you found this video informative and entertaining, and maybe even inspiring. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you didn't, please let me know why in the comments below. I'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions. And if you want to learn more about Lia and Jeremy's story, or read their detailed guides and tips on how to quit your job to travel, or just follow their hilarious adventures around the world, please check out their website at practicalwanderlust.com. You won't regret it. And that's it for today's episode of the Investing Iguana. Thank you so much for watching and for joining me on this journey. I hope you learned something new today, or at least had some fun. And I hope you'll join me again next time when we'll talk about another fascinating topic related to personal finance, investing, and retirement planning. Until then, stay smart, stay safe, and stay happy. This is Iggy, signing off. Peace out.